Okay, so yeah, let's open the floor for questions. Yeah, Indrajit.
Yes, sir. So I was wondering if you could give an example where instead of using the composition of F1 and F2, we can do something better. That is instead of using the fallback, we can actually do something that is more advanced.
Okay. Okay. All right. So yeah, the other thing that I didn't cover in my summary was that, look, I mean, it's not just you first structured your DFA into region-based analysis, but now, the region-based analysis has two parts to it. One is bottom-up, which is basically computing the summary transfer functions, and the other is top-down, which is actually executing the DFA on the hierarchy. Now, when we do the bottom-up, we have to basically say what is the summary transfer function in terms of the constituent transfer functions. And one way to basically do that is by defining three operators for the kind of region hierarchy that we talked about for reducible graphs and stuff. And by the way, you're not limited to doing that. Once again, we are just building a higher level kind of structure on the types of transfer functions that we will allow. And the kind of things we're going to do is composition, meet, and closure. And we say that, if you just define these three operators, what these operators do is they take in two transfer functions and give you a summary transfer function. And you can keep doing this to basically get larger. Now, for some kind of analyses, these operators may not be enough. You may want to do more sophisticated analysis, and you may want to have a full graph of transfer functions. So from that, you will extract a summary transfer function, and that's your choice. But but most analyses can be fit into these three operators. And if you can fit yourself into these three operators, it makes your life easy, doesn't it? You just have to specify these three operators and you're pretty much done. Okay. So that's what it is. And now the question here is, the three operators are composition, meet, and closure. So if I look at composition, is there an example where composition, F1 composed with F2 will give you a more precise answer than simply running DFA on it? Okay. And the answer is actually, okay, let's see. So, I mean, for example, any reversible computation or something like that, right? So let's say I was doing copy propagation. Okay, and I'm saying, recall what is copy propagation. I'm interested in figuring out statements of type x equals y. So if I know that x equals y, then I'll just replace x by y everywhere. So that's copy propagation. Now let's say my code is x equals y plus 1 and then followed by x equals y minus 1. So x equals y plus 1 followed by, or say y equals y plus 1 followed by x equals y minus 1. No, even that's not going to work. Okay, let's say it's x equals. Okay, so let's say the input is, so let's say the code is x equals x plus 1 followed by x equals x minus 1. Okay, now if I just run my traditional copy propagation, as soon as I see x equals x plus 1, basically I kill all mappings from x in my copy propagation, right, in the middle, at the middle point. And now when I actually go down, they're all killed. Killed means basically it's not there, so it's like bottom for x or something like that, right? So, but if you do a summary, then you can say, oh, you can do symbolic and say, okay, this is actually, it does plus 1 and then does minus 1. It's effectively nothing, and then I can have a summary transfer function for the entire thing. Say x equals y just gets preserved, and so this time we are getting better answer for copy propagation than what we would have got otherwise, right? Actually, that's also true so even for common sub-expression elimination or something like that, right? So let's say I have a common sub-expression, it says x equals y plus z, right? But across this basic block, which had two instructions, x equals x plus 1 and x equals x minus 1, I can preserve that common sub-expression mapping now because of a more precise composition than with using region-based analysis than my pure DFA. Okay, thanks for the question. Jay?
So I had a question in the construction of the region hierarchy, the bottom-up construction. So we said that when we encounter the loop, so a loop will have basically two parts. One of them would be the body region, which would be without the back edges. And then we would go a level up the hierarchy, and basically add those self loops and encapsulate it into some other region. So you said that in case of multiple back edges, we could either keep both of those edges or collapse them into one. So my question is, why would collapsing, I mean, would that basically be a wrong description of the loop? Because let's say we had a loop where uh, I mean, a normal loop, and then the second loop would be uh, the header has a self loop to itself. So that's two back edges. Wouldn't that be wrong if we collapse the two back edges into one?
Wouldn't that be what? Sorry, I don't understand that word that you're using. Wouldn't that be
Wouldn't
wrong?
that be wrong?
Wrong. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be. See, what do I mean by collapsing two back edges into one? It's basically like saying it's pretending as though both the exits of the loop body meet at a certain point. I mean, so you add one more dummy basic block that does nothing. It's a no-op, and then you get both the exits to point to this no-op, and then this no-op just goes back to the head. Right? That's what it is effectively. That's what collapsing would look like. So you just pretend as though the exits are just, you basically take all the exits and draw edges. You first create a dummy no-op basic block, and then you take all these exits and just create no-op edges to these no-op basic block. And now it starts looking like still like the original program, but just starts looking like a single package, right? Now, so there's nothing wrong with it, of course, right? I mean, after all, I have preserved the program semantics, and now I've converted two packages into a single package. Agree? Yeah. So there's nothing wrong with it from a from a correctness point of view, but there may be loss of precision by doing this. Okay, because you kind of now forcing a meet. Okay, from the two edges, from the two exits, and you're forcing a meet, and that could just lose your precision, and then you basically do the back edge. So you have just lost the precision. Whereas if you just do two separate back edges, then you're getting two different values, and you know which from this package you're getting this value, from that package you're getting that value, and based on that, using some symbolic analysis and the condition under which that package is taken, you may be able to do more sophisticated reasoning to get even more precise value, right? So I mean, yeah. So not collapsing can increase precision, but none of these are kind of wrong solutions. Okay, great. Thanks for the question. Okay. Okay, let me ask a question to begin a discussion. So I'm saying that in this, we need reducible graphs. Is it really true that region-based analysis must work on reducible graphs, or is it just a matter like, I mean, can region-based analysis be done on irreducible graphs without converting irreducible graphs to reducible graphs?
I think so, sir. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So what's the answer? What's the rationale?
Yeah. So what we can do is just encapsulate the ADS, the subgraphs, which are actually not reducible, into one region, and then that will be a single region now, right? So now the entire graph will be now reducible, where some of the regions are not reducible themselves. Right. But for them, we can just compute the DFA value, right, and use them as fallback. Right. And now the entire graph will be reducible.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, look, it's up to me how I choose my regions anyway, right? It's just that the particular algorithm that I discussed involves looking at loops, identifying loops, and then choosing them as regions and so on. But now, if I have a reducible, if I have a graph that is not reducible, then I can choose a different way of constructing the region hierarchy. And one way of constructing the region hierarchy is if you see an irreducible graph, for example, that canonical irreducible graph structure, right, where there's A, B, and C, and then A is pointing to both B and C, and B and C have a cycle between them, right? Now, if I see that structure, then I basically call that a region as well. Okay, and then I may just use, and then I need to have a way of finding the summary transfer function for this structure, right? Given individual transfer functions, I should be able to find the summary transfer function of the structure. And I can, I can just use my fallback trivial transfer function, which is just run DFA on it, which is okay. Or I can, because DFA doesn't depend on reducible or irreducible, it doesn't matter, right? Or I can do something more smart, something smarter, okay? And that's also okay. We don't know. I mean, it doesn't matter. But the point is that I can definitely do that, and things should and expect things to work, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I wanted to say something more. If I'm just kind of okay. Yeah, that's something I wanted to point out. Okay. Yeah, Jay.
So I have something to discuss about, not about these lectures, not about region analysis, but something in general about compilers. So Python has many implementations, and one of them being CPython. I mean, that's the most used implementation today. And so I read about it, and what it does is that it compiles Python to some intermediate bytecode, and then it is interpreted by a virtual machine. So with this implementation, there are actually some drawbacks, because we say that this implementation is very slow, and there's an issue of and global interpreter lock. So the interpreter only gives the one thread to be executed at one time. So there's no point of doing multi-threaded. I mean, there's no performance improvement with multi-threaded programs in this case. But there's another implementation.
That I'm sorry. So you have an interpreter, and why is there no performance gain with multi-threading? Sorry, I missed that part.
So there's a thing called a global interpreter lock.
Global interpreter lock.
So
Okay, got it. Okay, got
yeah.
it. Okay, got it. Okay.
This is one implementation, and there was another implementation which is relatively new called PyPy. It's basically an extension, and what it does is that it uses just-in-time compilation to translate Python code into machine native assembly language code, and it actually has performance improvements, and it removes the problem of the global interpreter lock. So my question is, why? I mean, what's the advantage of? Why was it chosen that for this implementation that that it will be an interpreted language rather than use just-in-time compilation? And because also, what are the scope of optimizations in the first strategy in the interpreted? Because I'm sure that there would be some differences in versus the just-in-time comparison versus the interpreted implementation.
Okay, yeah. Okay, interesting. Thanks for the question. By the way, I just wanted to complete the previous discussion. Yeah, the thing I wanted to say that I kind of just slipped out of my mind was that if you have irreducible graphs, right, then maybe the three operators that we have, composition, meet, and closure, will not suffice to develop summary transfer functions, right? Because they are basically okay. Okay, now coming to Jay's question about Python compiler, which is CPython, and then it seems that they use an interpreter. The interpreter has lots of inefficiencies. One of the inefficiencies is that it has a global interpreter lock, which basically prevents it from taking advantage of multi-threading on a multi-core machine. And then there's a second implementation which involves just-in-time compilation that compiles the code to assembly language as it runs, which makes it much faster. So question is, why did the first implementation which involves interpreter, why does it even exist at all? Why did those guys choose to do an interpreter-based implementation, and that too with a global interpreter lock? Is that the question? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, I think first of all, I would just like to point you to the first. I would just like to remind everyone of the first lecture here, which is compilation is partial evaluation of the interpreter, right? Basically, And in fact, that's how compilers started in the first place, right? So the initial things were all interpreted. First of all, people were developing. First processors came in, then people were just writing assembly code, one instruction after another. Then somebody said, okay, there should be a way to do fast development, rapid development, and then they did languages. And then for languages, there were interpreters. And then somebody said, okay, interpreters can be made faster. So even in the evolution of compilers, we see the similar trend, and we kind of see the similar trend even for kind of modern stacks like C, Python, and other things, or even Java, or even other kind of languages, right? So why do we have like multiple word implementations that are taking different design decisions? I mean, it's just a trade-off uh, between time to market and performance, right? I mean, time to market, I mean, quickly you want to basically get something out that's working, easy to develop, and easy to maintain and all that, and something that's usable and is good enough for most things, right? And then once it becomes more popular, and that's the typical economy of compiler that you would see, that the new language comes in. If it's a language that's a managed language or something, they will typically start with interpreters because they don't know how well the language will be adopted. So investing into developing a compiler for it, that to an optimizing compiler for it, is a huge investment, and it should justify the investment would be justified only if it's being used heavily, right? So you look at JavaScript, look at Java, look at Python, all these languages, right? And there are more. Basically, they just put out the language and an interpreter with it. People, for the first few programs that they're writing, don't care about performance, and then as the language becomes more popular, they start worrying about performance, and then there are separate implementations that come out, right? And that's true for example, even for Java, right? Most of it, like, because now Java is so heavily used for applications in, for example, mobile phone stacks like Android and things like that. Performance is super critical, and because it also affects battery life and things like that. And now people spend so much effort and money in basically making that faster using just-in-time compilation and all that. We already know what's the trade-off between just-in-time compilation and interpretation, I think, from our first few lectures, because if the same code is being executed millions of times, then just-in-time compilation is going to win, because you just have to compile once and you reap the benefits for the next million minus 100 executions, right? So yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question or.
The second question is about is there any difference about the optimizations which I can do in both of these strategies, just-in-time compilation and interpreting the language?
Okay, so what are the differences in optimizations in just-in-time compilation versus interpretation? I mean, are the optimization flavors similar or different? So first of all, I want to say that interpretation, talking about optimizations and interpretation, I mean, there are some simple optimizations that can be done very quickly, but very soon you run out of steam when you're doing interpretation, because one of the biggest overheads of doing interpretation is that you have to do fetch and decode every time. Okay, and that itself is the biggest bottleneck in interpretation. Okay, and so very soon that becomes a bottleneck, and so before you do any more optimization, you want to basically get rid of the interpreter and make it a compiled system before you do any more optimization. So I mean, optimization in the interpretation setting only has a limited scope, because very soon you're going to find out that after all these optimizations, it's actually the fetch and decode that's taking most of the time. So then you go to a compiler, and then once you go to a compiler, then all your regular things of optimization that we've been discussing in this course come in.